Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'd love to have you here live in our chat room and watching and interacting. Go to the website, thebibleforum.net, and all the links you'll ever need are there. If you'd like to have an email once a week that tells you what's going on, email me. Tell me that, give me your email so I can send it to you. In the religious news this week, we have churches in China. ChristianHeadlines.com is reporting that as coronavirus restrictions lift in China, the communist government is still steadfast in its ongoing persecution of Christians. In China, Bible-believing churches are called three self-churches. Three principles of self-governance, self-support, self-propagation. All three are enemies of the communist world. This designation was first proposed by Henry Venn, General Secretary of the Church Missionary Society from 1841 to 1873, and Rufus Anderson, Foreign Secretary of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. In April of this month, at least 48 three-self churches were shut down by the local government in Yunnan County. According to Bitter Winter, a magazine on religious rights and human rights in China, the reasoning seemed to be due to Yunnan County's large number of believers, making it one of the key targets of the CCP's religious persecution. Of course, according to the Christian Post, Yunnan County has a population of over 1 million people, in which more than 10% are Protestants, who attend over 300 officially registered three-self churches. In Yunnan's Doxy Township, a village press secretary told believers that shutting down churches and demolishing crosses was a part of state policy. One of the local believers noted that the press secretary said that, quote, there were too many believers in the county, end of quote. That after an inspection by the government. She went on to say, when so many believe in God, who will listen to the Communist Party? There's no other choice but to remove crosses from your churches. If you try to protest, they will accuse you of fighting against the Communist Party and the central government. In addition to church closures, the government ordered that religious symbols be purged from homes of believers. In late April, village officials removed couplets with crosses from over 100 households in just 2 days. The article offered no explanation as to what a couplet was. But this is a picture of what happens in the world. In this case, a communist atheistic country, when confronted with the gospel. It is necessary to eliminate the gospel. With the gospel being preached in a country, the Communist Party cannot survive. They know that. That's why we're dangerous. Here at home in Kentucky, the U.S. Sixth Court of Appeals overturned Kentucky's ban on a common second-term abortion procedure, although the judges differed greatly in how they described it. The appeals court, 3 judges, in a 2-to-1 ruling, affirmed a lower court decision that found the law unconstitutionally placed an undue burden on a pregnant woman. What is this burden? It is apparently having to know and feel their baby's death by dismembership. The banned procedure is what doctors call dilation and evacuation, D&E, but pro-lifers label it dismemberment abortion. It involves just that, dismembering the living unborn child and then extracting portions, pieces, or limbs of the unborn child from the uterus. That, according to the text, the law's text. That's how they described it. The court's majority said a D&E abortion takes place when, quote, physician first dilates the patient's cervix and then uses instruments to suction or remove the contents of the uterus. Do you understand what he just said? Baby's still alive. They don't call it a baby. Because, quote, fetus has grown larger than the cervical opening. The fetus tissue separates as the physician draws it through that narrow opening. They're vacuuming this child up, tearing it in part, as it lives and breathes. Judge John K. Bush, in his dissent, described the procedure in gruesome detail, saying he understands why some pregnant women would want the fetus's heart to be stopped before the procedure begins. Bush wrote, quote, Dr. Anthony Lavantino testified that in a D&E procedure, the fetus dies from dismemberment, from literally having arms and legs pulled off. It bleeds to death. Another physician, Dr. David Berry, described a D&E procedure in which the doctor pulled out a spine and some mangled ribs while the heart was actually still beating. Quote, it is not difficult to understand why a majority of women would want the heart to stop beating before the fetus undergoes such an ordeal. End of quote. As the Supreme Court has recognized, no one would dispute that for many, D&E is a procedure itself laden with the power to devalue human life. This is because the fetus in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. This is what Bush wrote, quoting a 2000 decision by former Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. Bush added, quote, a woman, even after hearing of the health risks involved, might opt for fetal demise simply to be assured that the fetus was not alive when its limbs were torn apart. Bush was nominated by President Trump. The two judges who voted in the majority, Judges Eric Clay and Gilbert Merritt, were nominated by Presidents Clinton and Carter, respectively. This is one reason it matters. Who is president of these United States? Do you know what contact tracing is? Contact tracing utilizes your smartphone to track down anyone who might have been infected with the coronavirus using an app. It begins with people who have recently been diagnosed, so those contacts can quarantine themselves and prevent further spread. In contact tracing, public health staff work with a patient to help them recall everyone with whom they have had close contact during the time frame while they may have been infectious. This according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Currently, there are two proposed models for contact tracing apps of this type. One model proposes that location data on citizens be collected and processed centrally by governments. This type of data collection has, understandably, been widely criticized by consumer and privacy rights groups. Criticized because of the unprecedented level of surveillance it would represent. Given that tech companies are already deploying this power in service to their governments with YouTube blocking content that contradicts the WHO, for example, these fears seem well justified. Another proposed model is to collect and store location and contact data on citizens' own devices. This distributed form of data collection has received widespread academic support because it is claimed that it provides a way for contact tracing to be performed without giving tech companies and governments access to real-time data on the movements and habits of their citizens. What this doesn't say, not yet, the International Air Transport Association, which represents 299 airlines, recently issued their publication entitled Biosecurity for Air Transport, a roadmap for restarting aviation, outlining their strategy to open up air travel as governments begin to lift travel restrictions. There is a section entitled, quote, the passenger experience, end of quote, and also, quote, temporary biosecurity measures, end of quote. Here's their vision of a post-COVID-19 flight. The organization calls for contact tracing, a controversial method of tracking the civilian population to track the spread of COVID-19. Keep in mind, almost every illustration of intrusive and repressive activity has begun with the efforts to keep people safe. The question becomes, safe from what? Well, safe from whatever is the current threat. All you need do is sacrifice your privacy and your rights. We will have contact tracing. It will be on all phones at some point. You will not have a choice. You may not even know years down the road that that's what's there. But somebody will always know where you are. It's a security measure. It's for your safety. It'll track down children who've run away or been stolen. It has a lot of good uses in the right hands.